about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
This is Trish and our first episode of Angelic Visions in the Night. And tonight we're going to look at Dragnet. Now, when I grew up with TV, there were three main channels. They programmed everything. The channels were ABC, CBS, and NBC. And in the 21st century, with the advent of the internet and the development of streaming, it went from being that three-channel system to an unlimited amount of ability for series, for programs. When I was introduced to Dragnet, it was already in reruns. The franchise is interesting because it started in 1949 on radio with Jack Webb, the original guy. And in 1951 through 1959, it transitioned into television. It followed the genre of cops and robbers in a film noir approach, and that lasted into the 50s as it started to transition to keep up with the culture. Or should I say, to a much more complicated society with a much more complicated list of criminals, crimes, and solutions. It stopped in 59, and it was picked up again in the network in 1967. Well, Jack Webb wanted to make it into films, like that would show on TV. They thought it would be more useful, that is, the executives, as a television series. It was actually CBS that picked up the program that ran 4 seasons from 1967 through 1970. And it starred Jack Webb again, Joe Friday, with his partner, Officer Bill Gannon, played by Harry Morgan. Jack Webb had always played Joe Friday. He went from sergeant detective, and I think that rank disappeared, so he eventually became Detective 3. The actor Jack Webb was John Randolph Webb, was born on April 2nd, 1920 in Santa Monica, California. He grew up in the Bunker Hill section of Los Angeles, and in the late 20s and 30s, he lived in the parish of Our Lady of Laurential Catholic Church and attended Catholic school. He became a radio personality in the 1940s and transitioned into Dragnet. Between the ending of the show in 1959 and the picking up of the show by CBS in 1967, Webb worked through as an executive producer for a show called G.E. True. He also collaborated with William T. Orr in helping Sunset Strip, and he sold a series called Temple Houston, which only ran 1 season. His partner, played by Harry Morgan, was from Detroit, and he started on stage in New York as early as 1931 in something called the Group Theater, one of the founders being Lee Strasberg, the famous director and actor's coach. He was in several movies from the 40s on: Shores of Tripoli, Wingin' a Prayer, Torch Song with Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly, How the West Was Won. He was a character actor that played a lot of roles. And in the 3rd season, he joined the cast of MASH on television in the 70s after Dragnet. He played Colonel Sherman T. Potter. He was also close friends with the famous band leader Glenn Miller. Each episode started with,
"This is the city, Los Angeles, California."
And after that, there would be a little narration by Webb Some like living dangerously. That's when I go to work. I carry a badge. And usually it pertains to the episode coming up. Along with that, at the end, they have the part where they show the person who was guilty of whatever crime and how they're sentenced. It wraps up the show nicely. When I was watching the closer today, what struck me is they had this pit, as in orchestra pit, but a pit of staff members, where the policemen sit at their desks, and so does Dragnet. But as you go into the police station at Dragnet, everything is in wood. The tables, and they sit at tables, Joe Friday's on one side and Bill Gannon is on the other. And along the walls are wood files. And everything is done with paper, pencil, and pen. The technology is dramatic when you compare the two. I picked bits of 3 episodes that really show this very traditional masculine show trying to evolve into the modern era of the 1970s that dealt with issues around drugs and violence, and also protesting for the women's rights, the civil rights, gay rights, ideas of free love, and against the Vietnam War. It evolved the story of a partnership of cops and how they evolved from the traditional flat-foot beat cops to a more modern approach and moved through their community embracing the new values and the new culture. The drug culture was exploding in the late 60s and early 70s, not only in Los Angeles, but across the country. The integration of women in the workforce. The show also explored the African American community in Los Angeles, encouraging the African American community to join the police department in order to help serve their communities. So the first one that I picked, and they're not in order, is Season 3, Episode 13, called Community Relations. Joe Friday and Bill Gannon go to the community colleges around Los Angeles trying to recruit African Americans and Hispanics into the police department. And you're going to see a familiar face in this, a very young O.J. Simpson. In this meeting, the graduated students who are adults, in this case, are asking questions of the officers about how the pay goes. One of them making remarks they could make the same in a factory because the pay is not so good for a cop. I appreciated the fact they kept trying to stay current. Another episode that I like is the LSD story. Season 1, Episode 1. It is about this teen boy that they find on an acid trip. And they find him in the park with his head buried, literally buried in the sand, half painted blue and half painted yellow. His name is Benji, and he's clearly high. The episode makes an attempt to demonstrate how harmful LSD is in particular, but drugs in general are, as if it's speaking to a younger audience. There was a real attempt by Dragnet to connect with a young audience, and the drug culture was relatively new, so though there was some information, there wasn't a lot, except that it was harmful. And eventually, at the end of the show, Benji ODs. He dies from an overdose of barbiturates, various barbiturates, and LSD. In Season 2, there is this one part that I love, because Jack Webb and even Harry Morgan at times were notorious for taking time out and having these little narratives. They were like lectures. There's one in the episode called The Big Prophet, which is literally Season 2, Episode 18, I believe. Jack Webb lectures this guru of kind of a cult about drugs. Here is what he says to Bentley. Who is this guru? I'll tell you what I know. I know, in fact, too many kids that begin with pot end up with heroin, then on to LSD. And he didn't even know about ketamine. I know if you drink, you suffer a loss of judgment. If you drink to excess. But I also know that your judgment returns when you sober up. I know, and so do you, that when you flip out on an acid trip, you never know where you're going to slip out again. This is now, Bentley, not a couple of years ago. We've had time to see and study the effects of LSD. People who haven't had a dose in weeks still sail out on another trip, and they never know when. The minute they've dropped one acid capsule or ingested it in any way, they bought the farm. They've lost the chance to depend on or even restore the most precious of all inner senses, judgment. And in my way of thinking, without judgment, you might as well be dead. And your brain is, so why not the rest of you? There's nothing better than the advice of Joe Friday. There is another phenomenon I want to discuss that goes really from mid-century TV through to the 21st century, till about 2015 on television. That is the phenomenon of character actors that would go between shows. Now, there is this actress by the name of Virginia Gregg. She is in a movie with Tony Curtis and Cary Grant in Operation Petticoat 1959, and she is in 14 episodes of Dragnet. Now, normally that could be a reoccurring role, but the truth is she played a whole bunch of different parts. But you see them. I saw them from one show go to another. You could see somebody guest star on Mannix and hop over and be on Adam 12. That happened a lot, and it was... Stars are kind of like family when you see them like that. They're like, oh, there she is again. Oh, there he is again. He does such a good job. And it carried over because even between shows like Drop Dead Diva and Desperate Housewives and The Closer, you would see the actresses and actors go between shows. I always felt like it was family and you were seeing somebody that you loved. Now, with multiple streaming platforms and an international studio, so to speak, you don't see it as much. And I miss that. It's sort of down home family. Not in a creepy way, but in an appreciative way of valuing character actors and co-stars that don't get as much attention as the regular stars. So that's it with my first video. I'm going to go catch another show.
Just the facts, ma'am.